everybody. Happy Wednesday. We are here back again at Shields Live. I'm back again. I've been off for a couple weeks for different things. Great to be back. It's a wonderful day. It is a little hot, so might as well be inside watching us. Today, Jan's going to talk about stabilizers. There's so many different kinds, and when to use what, how much to use. It can get really overwhelming and confusing, and we're always learning. They're always coming out with new stuff. So today, Jan's going to kind of give you a little tutorial on different stabilizers, obviously what we carry and different uses for them. So it's just kind of nice. It's always nice to have a refresher, even when we do events with different companies, vendors. We always get something out of it just because, we're always trying to learn. So, but yes, again, thank you for joining us, enjoying, the weather, the sun's out, and I'll turn it over to Jan and I'll be back in a little bit. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Tim. Hi, everybody. So we're going to talk about stabilizer today. And I kind of wanted to do kind of a basic overview. I'm not going to try to get too, hi, everybody. People are talking to me. I'm going to turn off the little banner here just a second. And then I'll switch the comments over so I can see better. But we're going to talk a little bit about the stabilizers that we carry. So I'm going to talk about what we have, on our website, in our stores, what I use, sizes, stuff like that. So just kind of give you an overview and then kind of give you some ideas of some of the stuff that I use. And if you have questions of certain types of fabrics you're sewing on, please ask a question and then I will try to give you a good answer about how to stabilize that. Okay. So I like to do just some basic stuff so that you will know a little bit more about your basic stabilizers. There's so many stabilizers out there, and I basically group them into little groups, and I don't want you to feel overwhelmed about it. And I'll give you the basics of what I use for stabilizers for most everything. I have kind of a staple group that I use. So if you're going to, at the end, I'll say, okay, if you're going to have just buy 1 or 2 or 5 stabilizers or something, just like a basic group, this is what you should get, and it'll do most of the stuff you need. There's a lot of specialty stuff. So we're just going to talk about the basics today. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn the camera down to the table here so I can hold things up in front of you. I thought it'd be a little easier than holding it up like here. So, all right, let me get this switched over. How is everybody today? Looks like people are coming in. Just a second, let me turn the camera down here. All right, hopefully we don't get too much glare. I'm getting a lot of glare today, so I apologize. Sometimes this black is glary. I don't know why. And my camera, microphone. Okay. All right, so hopefully you can hear me now. So I'm going to sit here in front of the microphone. And give me a second here. Hi, everybody. Everybody saying hi. Hello. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is there's several different groups of stabilizers. So if I lift my camera up, you're going to see I have a lot of stabilizer laying on my table here, okay? So I have them kind of grouped in little groups here. These are Tearaways, okay? So I'm going to kind of group it in like basically 4 categories. So these are Tearaways, and there's differences in those Tearaways. And then we'll talk about each one of those. And then these are all Cutaway stabilizers. Whoops, I'm going to have them all on the floor now. Sorry, guys. I have this big long one because I'm out of the one size. So Cutaways are, these are all the different ones. There's mesh cutaways, there's medium cutaways, and so on. So I have those kind of here. And then these here that I just knocked over are all the washaways, okay? So washaways I use for a lot of things, including freestanding lace. So those are the washaways. And then these down here at the end, these little short ones, are also a washaway and a heat away, and those are toppings. So those are really not stabilizers. They're for topping your fabrics to keep your stitches from sinking down into your fabric, okay? And then I've got a couple of specialty things down here that I use quite a bit that I thought we could talk about. Okay. So let's talk first about the tearaways. So I'm just going to kind of move the camera back this way. So I'm going to talk about these tearaways. As a general rule, tearaway and cutaways. Okay. So as a general rule, if your fabrics that you're sewing on do not stretch, you use a tearaway. Okay, so if it's a woven fabric, a non-stretchy fabric, for the most part, you will use a tearaway. So that's kind of a general rule. Okay, if your fabric stretches, like a t-shirt, a sweatshirt, any other kind of fabric that has stretch to it, you would use a cutaway. All right, so that's kind of a general rule. So here's the tearaways and the cutaways. So we'll start with those first. Okay, so I primarily, when I need a tearaway, I primarily use, and we carry mostly Dime and Floriani products. Okay, so I have the Dime Light Tearaway Stabilizer. I use this a lot for my things that call for tearaways. This is a 12-inch roll, so I wanted to show you the different sizes of rolls too. So this is a 12-inch roll. And for most of the hoops, the 12-inch roll is probably the most economical and saves you from, wasting as much as, the most. There are some hoops, however, that you need to have a 15-inch stabilizer. So this is the Floriani equivalent. Floriani's equivalent is actually a medium tearaway. The light tearaway in the Dime stabilizer is about the same weight as the Floriani medium. So that's why we usually buy the light Dime and the medium Floriani. Now you can see that this roll is longer. So this is a 15-inch roll. So if you have up to an 8x12 hoop, this 12x12-inch roll, and it's like 10 yards, 10 yards, and works very well for almost all the hoops. If you have, though, like a Dream Machine, Destiny, Stellaire, you have that 9.5 by 14 hoop, and you really need the 15-inch ones to go in the width of that hoop. That is not a hoop I use a ton. And then the new Luminaires and Solarises have a 10.5 by 16 hoop, and you almost really need to go up to a 20-inch. So most of these companies also have a 20-inch roll. So this is a very long roll, and I do use the 20-inch roll in my for my PR hoops because I have that great big 14-inch square hoop. So I use a 20-inch roll a lot. So those are kind of the three sizes. Okay, so that's the first thing. So tearaway. In my drawer, I have a 12-inch tearaway light from Dime and a medium tearaway in a 15 from Floriani because I do have that larger hoop, and I do like that 15-inch length for that 9.5 by 14. I do use that hoop quite often. So these are the ones that I would use for my tearaways. And it says designed for low density stitch counts on stable fabric. So in other words, stable fabrics. That means non-stretchy fabrics. And what it talks about stitch count. So when I learned about stabilizer, I look at the stitch count on my machine. And in a 5x7 hoop, which I use a lot, 5x7, 6x10 hoop, one piece of tearaway holds about 6,000 or 7,000 stitches. Okay, so if you have something that's, say, 10,000 stitches, you need to have more than one piece of stabilizer. Otherwise, it won't be stable enough. Okay, so that's the number I remember in my head, somewhere around 6,000, 7,000. When I get to some of the cutaways, it raises up to about 10,000 stitches. Okay, there are other issues with stitch count, like when you're doing quilting and you've got batting in there. Batting actually acts as a stabilizer, so then I don't have to have as much stabilizer on the back of things. Okay, so I wanted to start with the tearaways. So here's my main staple tearaways: the light tearaway from Dime and the medium tearaway from Floriani. Okay, so there are options in Tearaways for different things. So like this is kind of a crisp Tearaway. I make a fair amount of like recipe towels, and they have quite a lot of stitches because they have lots of words on them. And my favorite Tearaways to use for that then, and I often do, they also have a fusible version of a Tearaway. So if you have something that has a high stitch count, I normally fuse something on the back of almost everything I do when it comes to garments, especially. So we'll get to that in a minute. But when I'm making these tea towels, I like to use this fuse and tear. And it also has kind of water soluble property that the more you wash it, the more of the stabilizer comes off. But then it's fused to my towel. And then I have to look at the stitch count. So like the stitch count on those towels sometimes is like 20,000 stitches. Well, I know I can get about 7,000 stitches with this piece of stabilizer, the first one that I have ironed on the back, because this is fusible, see? Okay. Then I have to lay a couple of more underneath. So there's something that they call floating, and we'll just pretend that this is my hoop. Okay. So here's my hoop. And you don't have to hoop all the stabilizer. So I may have fused this to my tea towel. Okay. And then I hooped everything in the hoop, because when you fuse an item to the back of your fabrics, this is the demonstration I always think of. When you fuse this to the back of your, say, tea towel, okay, it becomes one piece of fabric. So it's fused together, right? If you just hoop a towel with a piece of tearaway underneath, they're two pieces of fabric. And what normally happens when you hoop it into a normal hoop is that the top part of the fabric is loose and the bottom is more taut. So the thing that's on top is the thing that we're sewing on. So that means that it can be then get puckery because it's loose and it's not joined together. Well, if I fuse that tearaway on the back of that, then my tearaway and my fabric are one, and everything is snug together and it won't pucker. But often on those towels, then I have got this fused on. I need to lay a couple more pieces of stabilizer on the back. So I'll just cut a couple pieces of stabilizers, or one, depending on how many stitches. For these tea towels, they usually have a lot because they have lots of letters. And so I will then cut 2 pieces of tear and wash, which is basically the same as this without the fusible, just the plain tearaway. But it also has that kind of water soluble property that as you wash the item, I pull it all off at the end and then I wash my towel, and it takes almost all the stabilizer off. That is not under stitching, but it leaves it under the stitching. So these two are they're a tearaway, but they have a little bit of a water soluble property. They do not completely go away. But if it completely goes away, like with my recipe towels, the towel will just wad up in a ball when I wash it because there's no stabilizer then. So I want stabilizer to stay under the lettering so that it stays flat. Okay. So what I mean by floating, so like if I have this in my hoop on the back of my fabric, in my hoop, I've cut a couple pieces of my tear and wash that I'm going to put on my towel, underneath of my towel. I would just take the pieces of stabilizer and I would just lay them on. I just pick the hoop up, pretend this is the hoop, and just lay it under here against the bed of the machine. And when you start stitching, it's just going to pick it up and take it with it. Okay. So floating is very, very common, and I float a lot for different things. I also float tearaways with my cutaways. So we'll talk about that in a minute when we talk about t-shirts. Okay. So I have my basic tearaway that I use for a lot of things. These are the basic ones: the light tearaway and the dime, the medium tearaway and the Floriani. Okay. Then I use this fusible tearaway with the tear and wash, and I use this for stuff like towels, tea towels, cotton or woven fabrics that are going to probably get washed quite a bit, but I want the stabilizer to stay in there because I'm always afraid that the stabilizer, if there's no stabilizer, it's just going to be a ball when you wash it up. So this will stay under your lettering and so on. Okay, so these two are also tearaways, but they're used for a different purpose. And it does give you some more information here about it. And it says it's designed to dissolve when the item is washed. So it has a water soluble. It doesn't completely go away. It stays under the stitches. But these are great for my tea towels because I make a lot of those. Okay. Now, the other thing I use Tearaway on, sometimes, it's hard to hoop something that needs really Tearaway. And they make Tearaway that is a sticky Tearaway. And this is called Peel and Stick. This is the dime. This is a 12-inch roll as well. These two are in 12-inch. I normally keep these in 12-inch instead of the 15. This is Peel and Stick, and it is a Tearaway stabilizer that is very similar to this Tear and Wash, by the way. So it has a little bit of that dissolvable property, but it has a tacky surface to it. All right, so this is for those hard to hoop things that need some Tearaway. Like when I do some of the Kimberbell projects, like the towels or the tote bags, they often call for a tacky stabilizer. And this is what I use because then I can just pull it off. And I know when I wash the item, it'll go away even more. And it's going to stick right down to the surface of the stabilizer. Okay, so sometimes those hard to hoop items, you can use a sticky stabilizer. Okay, this is a Tearaway, and Floriani has a version of it as well. There's this called Perfect Stick. This is the 15-inch roll. So we usually carry the 15-inch roll in the Floriani and the 12-inch rolls in the dime. Okay, so these are very similar, and they both have that same kind of wash away type of property to them. Okay, so they're very similar to each other. So these two I use a lot. Now, if I was going to buy just one or two of these Tearaways to have in my stash, I would probably tell you to buy the Dime Light Tearaway and some Peel and Stick. Okay, or the Floriani Perfect Stick, because I use these two Tearaways the most. I do make those towels, so then I use these two. So these would be not the ones I would tell you to get first. I would tell you to get maybe these two first. Okay. Do you use a floater with this one? Yes. So when I use with the Peel and Stick, yes. So sometimes I have to, like if I stick something down, let's say I'm doing, Margaret asked that. So let's say that I'm doing a tote bag. Kimberbell does a lot of their tote bags this way, and it has a lot of stitches in it. So I'm going to look at the stitch count, and I know that, I'm going to be around 6,000, 7,000, it's maybe 10,000 stitches. Well, then I might stick it down. So that's one layer of stabilizer. Okay. And then I'm going to float one underneath. And I'll just probably float at that point one of the light Tearaway underneath of it. Okay. The rule is you can only float two pieces. So don't float more than two pieces of stabilizer. But we can also add stabilizer to the fabric if we need more. So I'm going to explain that a little bit as we go along here. Okay. So you can only float two. You can hoop, obviously, one with this Perfect Stick. Okay, but then we can also put some stabilizer on the fabric if we need to, or we can put something that is like a preparatory fabric. It's not really stabilizer, it's more of a prep stuff that's for your fabric. Okay, so these are the Tearaways. So like I said, if you're going to buy, let's say you're going to buy two of these, I tell you to buy light Tearaway and Peel and Stick. Okay, so those are the two that I use probably the very most out of all of these stabilizers. And then, of course, you can get the 15-inch rolls if you have a larger hoop. Okay, all right, so I'm going to lay these up here. Get these out of the way. Okay, now let's talk about cutaways. Okay, so cutaways are the other kind of staple that you would have in your bag of stabilizers. And the one that I use a whole bunch is no-show mesh. And it's a very light cutaway. And it is made, I use it for like quilting. You know, this is a very soft cutaway, and I use it for my quilting projects with batting, and I just leave it in because it doesn't tear off. It just is just a cutaway, and it stays in. And then you can put your batting in there, and this actually only holds about maybe 6,000, 5,000, 6,000 stitches. It doesn't hold as much because it's lighter weight, but when you add the batting onto it, you don't need very much more stabilizer. So depending on how many stitches it has. So I look, if it's a high stitch count, I might add a piece of tearaway even with it to make it have more stitches. Okay, so don't be afraid to lay a piece of stabilizer under your hoop. Okay, so no-show mesh is wonderful for quilting, and I use it all the time for that. I also use this on t-shirts. However, the t-shirts need to have something, they're not stable, right? So these are for those not stable fabrics like knits and t-shirts. So let's say I want to sew my t-shirt logo on my Shield Sewing Center shirt, and they have a fusible version of no-show as well. So what I do when I make a t-shirt is I use a fusible no-show, a piece that is big enough to go in my hoop, and I fuse it to the back of my shirt. Okay, and I have the dime 12-inch rolls, and I have the Floriani 15-inch rolls if you need something on a bigger scale. Okay, and I use this on the back of my hoop. Okay, and or on the back of my shirt, and then it has to be big enough to fit in the hoop. Don't be skimpy with it. It has to fit in the hoop. Okay, then on my t-shirt, I'll hoop it maybe in my 4x4 hoop. And I'm looking at my little Shield Sewing Center shirt I have on right now. This one only has maybe about 7,000 or 8,000 stitches, but so it's kind of right at that, 6,000-7,000 range. And I'm like, oh, I better float one. So then what I do, so I have this on the back of my shirt, hooped in my hoop. Then I lay a piece of the light Tearaway as a floater underneath, just one piece. So you can mix and match cutaways and tearaways, because this is going to tear off. It's just for stitch count so that nothing will pucker, and this will stay on the shirt. So what I do then, when I get done sewing it, I tear my tearaway off, okay? And then I pull this up because it's a fusible that's not real strong. I pull it up, and then I trim about 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch all the way around my design, and then just press it down again with an iron. And this will just stay on, and it's very soft against the skin. And I just leave this in the shirt then, okay? But I do mix and match. I use these two, one of these two, and I use the Tearaway as my floater then, okay? I can mix and match them. So these no-shows, Dime calls theirs no-show, and Floriani calls theirs, whoops, second here, I don't have it, the power mesh. I don't have, unfortunately, I only had a 20-inch rolls. That's why I got this big long one. They call it power mesh now. Floriani's no-show mesh, or they call it power mesh. So these are I usually have this in 15. They were just on back order, so that's why I don't have any right now. I have a 20. And then this is the 12-inch no-show. But I use this a lot with my quilting. So if you've done some Kimberbell things, or if you've done like stuff with batting, this is what we're using all the time. Okay. I use the fusible version of that. So here's the fusible no-show in the Dime. This is a 12-inch roll, and the fusible power mesh in the Floriani, and that's a 15-inch roll. Okay, so I use those. And then they also make a heavier cutaway. And there's times, like let's say I'm doing a sweatshirt that's a heavier shirt, and it has a rather large design on the front. I often then use a cutaway on that, and I don't have one right now, but they also have a fusible cutaway. So I like to fuse something on the back of that sweatshirt, hoop that into the hoop, and then I'll often still lay a piece of tearaway or two underneath. So depending on what you're putting on, it may have a lot of stitches and needs more stabilizer. So I'll still use tearaway and I'll leave the medium cutaway in my sweatshirt. It just gives it more body on the front. Okay, we're going to talk about toppers also. So when I'm doing t-shirts, I also use, we'll just do the toppers now since we're talking about t-shirts. So after I put my fusible no-show on my shirt and hoop it in my hoop, and I float my piece of tearaway, all t-shirts, sweatshirts, anything that has somewhat of a pile on it needs to have a topper. And that's another category here. So the water-soluble topper is just what it says. It is a topping. It is not a stabilizer. And this is the plasticky stuff. And I just cut a piece of it big enough to go over my design. And then I normally tape it down on the corners to keep it from moving around on me. But what this does is it holds the stitches up off the surface of the fabric so that they don't bury down in the threads of the fabric. And it makes your stitching look much more professional. And then this one washes away. Okay, so it stays on while you're sewing, and then you just can pull it off. And then when you wash the shirt, it'll wash the rest of it away. Okay, so I use this all the time on garments that have some sort of pile. So I always use them on t-shirts and sweatshirts, especially when you do those. Okay. I don't always use this. You can use it on cotton fabrics as well. Anything that has a pile, I use a topper. Okay. If they can be washed, it's fine. There's also one, I have to reach it. This is the other one that they have, and this one's a Floriani. I don't carry the dime in this. I carry the dime water soluble in the little. And the other thing about these water solubles, guys, make sure you leave them in the little plastic containers. That's why I ordered these plastic containers. These need to be airtight, and I often put mine in a baggie and then put it in here and then put the lid on, because they get kind of crispy. They dry out if they're left open. So make sure that water soluble topping is contained in a container and not left out in the air. Okay. They also make a removable topping. And again, this is a topping. This is the Floriani Heat and Gone. And I often use this on towels, like bath towels, terry cloth towels that have a real high pile, terry cloth bathrobes, that kind of thing. Because when you're sewing on this is not going away. This does not wash away. You can pull off whatever is showing. And then if you just take a medium iron, it tells you on here what the iron temperature should be, and just touch the Heat and Gone, it will dissolve where it is touched, but it will stay under the stitches. So like when you're washing those towels all the time and you're washing those bathrobes all the time, the stabilizer is going to stay under there so that the little nubbies of the terry cloth will not come up into your or come up through your thread and make your design look ugly. Okay, so one of these two toppings, I use water soluble probably more often than I do the Heat and Gone, but I do like this for bath towels and like terry cloth robes that I use for the toppings. Okay, so those are the toppings. When it comes to what I would tell you to purchase, let's say if you're just going to buy 2 or 3 of these stabilizers, I have for sure no show in my box of stabilizer. This is one of my favorite stabilizers. I do a lot of quilty things that I'm using batting, and so I use this all the time. So this is the no show. I also have the fusible version of that because I have to sew on t-shirts often for myself to wear to work. So I use the fusible no show. Okay, so no show and fusible no show are the dime, and it's the fusible power mesh and the power mesh in the Floriani. And then I still need to use a medium cutaway every now and then. This is a stiffer stabilizer. I don't use it as often, but I would tell you definitely these are the 2 that I would tell you to purchase, and then maybe a medium cutaway. Some of the other ones are a little bit ones that I don't use as often. So I hope that that makes that a little bit more clear. So I don't want to have like a billion stabilizers, but there are different reasons to have different stabilizers. So you have to have different ones for different fabrics. Okay. When it comes to the toppings, I tell you to buy the water soluble topping first. And this is the dime. And I love these because they have the little plastic tubes. I can keep it in my tube, and then I put a baggie in there and keep it from getting all crispy on me. Okay, so I love these little tubes. All right, so there's the toppings and the cutaways. Okay, up a second here. I'm going to have to go grab, you're going to have to give me just a second. I forgot my power adapter for my computer, and I'm going to run out of battery. So give me just 1 second. Sorry about that. We got a couple of phone calls and people came in right as I was setting up. And I forgot to go grab the power cord. Okay, so are there questions so far? We had a question about the floaters. Does everybody understand what I mean by floating, by laying the stabilizer underneath? Tearaways and cutaways are my two staple stabilizers. And depending on what else you do, the next set are the washaways. And I use these quite often for different reasons. I make lace. So these are what I'm going to be using for my lace also. So the plain water soluble. This is a fabricy looking water soluble. I don't know if you can see it very well through here, but it's not the clear plastic stuff. That is topping. This is for freestanding lace. And I use Sew and Wash. And the Floriani version is called Wet and Gone. So if you need a wider one, I have the 15-inch in the Floriani, and I have the 12-inch in the dime. Okay. This is what I make my freestanding lace out of. I use 2 layers of this for freestanding lace. And it washes out nicely, but it still has a nice stiffness to it when it's done. And that is I usually use the 12-inch is what I usually use. Okay. There are some freestanding things that I use or I make that also need to have an adhesive version. So like we're going to be doing an event this weekend, and we're going to be making a little pie carrier, but part of the little design is freestanding. It like hangs off the top of the little pie carrier up here. So you have to have it's freestanding up here. So it has to have a washaway, okay, like at the top. But so what works really well, they also make a tacky version of Sew and Wash. So this is the adhesive Sew and Wash. So this has a tacky surface, but it washes away just like my Sew and Wash does. Okay, so it's going to disappear completely because it's a true wash away. It's like a fabric. Let me show you on my little card here. I think it should be on here somewhere. They have so many stabilizers. I was afraid to show you this card because it has so many things on it that it's very confusing. So I just wanted to show you the ones that I use all the time. Okay, here's my Sew and Wash. So you can see it's kind of like a fabric. Can you see it? That it's kind of a fabricy stuff. And when I put this in water, it's going to completely dissolve. Okay. So that is what I use for my lace, and I use 2 layers of that. This adhesive Sew and Wash is the same stuff with the adhesive paper on the top. And then I can stick things down. So like, for instance, this tote bag we're making, you would need to stick the tote bag down to the adhesive, and then the top part of it is going to be freestanding. So then I would wash that away. So like, here's the adhesive version right here. And you can see there's paper on the other side. So here's the sticky stuff is on this side. I can pull that out here. And this will be the tacky surface. If I can get a hold of it. There we go. And it's very soft. You can see it's soft. but it's tacky. And then that's what I'm going to use. And then the rest of it washes away because it is a wash away. Okay. So I personally would tell you with the washaways to buy sew and wash first, especially if you make lace. I don't use my adhesive sew and wash quite as much, but these are the two that I own because I do a fair amount of Kimberbell items that call for an adhesive wash away, and that's what this is. Okay, so these are the two then that I use there. Okay, so we have washaways, we had tearaways, and we had cutaways. So the other thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, we talked about the toppers. So we have the two toppers, okay? And then at the end, I'm gonna go through and kind of tell you again what I would tell you for a basic set of stabilizer. Okay. So they also have this stuff that is for preparing or prepping your fabric. And these are the two items that I have used in the past. Dream Weave is a Floriani product, and it's a very soft kind of a tricot, and I use this for two reasons. This is actually a fabric prep. So if you want to give your fabric more stability, if you iron this on the back of your fabric and then apply your stabilizers afterwards, it will keep your fabric from wrinkling. This is very, very soft to the touch, but primarily, and it's a little bit more expensive. So that the reason, so this is what I use it for, is it adheres it's very strong when it adheres. I use this on the backs of my t-shirts, especially if I'm doing things for children or people with sensitive skin. I like to iron this on the back of the fabric over the over the stitches. That bobbin thread is a little bit on the rough side. So I like to iron this on. I just cut a piece that's about, a quarter of an inch all the way around it and iron it on the back. And then that stays in the shirt so that it's soft against the skin. Okay. So that's what I love Dream Weave for. And that's why I got it out. I don't use it for preparing my fabrics as much because it is a little bit more expensive. So I use it mostly for covering the stitches because it's so soft. Okay. So I really like that. And then the other thing that I use mostly for my prepping of my fabrics is Pellon's SF101. It's called Shape Flex. We use this a lot in quilting on the backs of our background fabrics if we're doing appliques. And it just keeps things from puckering. And it also, it keeps things from puckering, and it just keeps things nice and flat for you. When you go to do your embroidery, you want everything to stay nice and flat and not be puckered. And so this stuff works wonderfully. I carry it in the smaller, it's 15 inches by 2 yards, smaller packages, because you may just need just a few pieces. And I always have this on the website and in the store. So this is more of a preparatory. It says interfacing. It's more of a prep for your fabric, and it is not a stabilizer, but it gives your fabric stability, and also, it gives your fabric stability and keeps it nice and flat. Okay. So that's another category. It's sort of like your interfacing or your prep materials. Okay. And then the one thing that I really love is I do a lot of positioning with my designs, and I've done a bunch of stuff with this, and this is called print. It's not really a stabilizer, but it's in the stabilizer rack. So I wanted to show you print and stick target paper. So what you can do is I open up my design, and if you only have you can get a free version of the Floriani tool shed. I'm sorry, the dime tool shed, and you can open up your design in there, and then you can print off this target paper. You can see the paper here with the lines on it, and then you can really get everything lined up. And this you can run through your printer, and then it has a tacky surface on the back. Okay, so it has your paper on the back, and it's tacky, and then these are repositionable. So you can put it back on the backing and use it over and over again. And I've often done like a whole quilt with just one. Okay, so it's really great, and you can put it through your printer. It comes in 8.5 by 11 sheets. Okay, so I really love this stuff, and I would tell you to get, if you don't have it, this is the way I get a lot of things positioned, is by printing it out, laying it on my shirt, and then I can get it aligned just right where I want it. Okay, so that's print and stick target paper. All right. So one last thing I wanted to talk to you about. If you're confused about stabilizer, Dime has this wonderful little tool, and this really does help. They have a lot of stabilizer, okay? So a lot of these things that are along the outside edge of this is all the different types of fabrics, okay? And then what you do is you dial this little thing, it's called the embroiderer's compass. And you dial this up to the one you want. So let's say I want to do knits, lightweight t-shirts, and onesies, okay? And it tells me to use no-show mesh for left chest size, lightweight cutaway for larger designs. Okay, well, that's kind of what I'd use as a cutaway. I like to fuse. It does not say to fuse here, but I like to fuse to my t-shirts. So this is very helpful because it kind of gives you a basic idea of what you're supposed to be using. And then it's two-sided. So this side has a bunch of fabrics on it. And then if I turn it over, has a bunch more. So let's say I want to do a denim. Let's say denim. So we can dial it to denim. And it says medium soft tearaway. So tearaway on denim because it does not stretch, right? And so that gives us but then again, we need to look at the stitch count. So make sure you're looking on your machine. And if it has a lot of stitches, don't just put one piece of tearaway because it's not going to be enough. Okay. So that's kind of how I do that. I learned to stabilize through some of the Floriani classes. And I look at the stitch count. So I think, oh gosh, it's got 10,000 stitches. Better put 2 pieces of stabilizer. I'd rather have just a little bit too much than not enough, because if it's not enough, it's just going to be puckered. Okay. So this little tool is very helpful if you're a little unsure yet, what goes with what. And it has knits and it has sheer fabrics, like here's vinyls, leather, all these different types of fabrics all the way around both sides. Okay. So I really do like this, and it's very helpful, and at least gets you on the right track with the right type of stabilizer, like the right category, tearaway, cutaway, and so on. Okay. All right. So that's another little tool. And let's see. So let's talk about what I would tell you probably to buy. So if you don't have much for stabilizer, I have a little bit of everything because I do lots of different things. But this is my staples in my. It also tells you needles. It does, Lynn. However, I don't always agree with the needle sizes because they use a lot of little itty bitty teeny needles that you will break your needle threaders with. So I'm very, very careful when it comes to the needle suggestions. So I actually don't look at those. I use a number 11 embroidery needle probably 99% of the time. And they like to change the needles, and I get a little worried about that because some of these needles are too small for needle threaders. Okay, so I don't look at that part. I just like to look at the stabilizer parts. Okay, so I don't pay attention to the needles. I just do the stabilizers on this one. Okay, all right. So let's talk about what I would purchase. I would purchase first, if you just needed a basic set. My favorite tearaway is light tearaway. Okay, so here's my light tearaway. And if I was only going to get one cutaway, I would get no-show. Unless I was doing lots and lots of t-shirts, I would get the fusible no-show instead. So if I was primarily making garments, I would use the fusible. And if I'm going to do some of the quilty things like we do with Kimberbell and that kind of thing, I would use no-show without the fusible. Okay, so one of those two, depending on what you're doing most. And then I would also, I thought I would also like to make lace. Okay, so I would then buy some sew and wash. And that's the non-fusible version of it, or the non-tacky version of it. Okay. And then the last thing I know for sure I would get is I would get a water-soluble topping. So I'm going to get my arm out of here, sorry. My water-soluble topping. So there's kind of my favorite 4. Water-soluble topping, sew and wash, no show, either fusible or non-fusible, depending on what I'm making, and my light tearaway and the dime. Okay, so that's my basic set. Those are my 4. So the next thing that I would add would be I would add a peel and stick, which is the tacky tearaway, because I use this quite often. Okay, so that's the other one I would add. And then I would also add my adhesive sew and wash, because I use this quite often for freestanding items that I'm also like sewing off of a garment or a towel or a bag. Okay, so this is the other thing that I would use. Okay, that would be the next thing. So I'm going to put that over here in my supplementary pile. Okay, and then I would use, let's see, the last thing I think I would get for me would be a medium cutaway. I don't use standard medium cutaway very often, but I do need it occasionally for things. So that would be kind of a supplementary one for me as well. Okay. And then the other ones are the duplicates of these. And then I would tell you, if you're going to do lots of like cotton towels, and hand towels, I would tell you to buy these 2, because I use these a lot, because that's something that I do. So these are more of a specialty item. Okay. And then, oops, I'm going to have them all on the floor. And then I would tell you to buy, for prepping your fabric, especially if you do a lot of quilty things, I would tell you to buy the SF101 Shape Flex, because I use a lot of this. And this is a very important thing when I'm doing my quilting projects. Okay. I do use Heat and Gone just for my terry cloth items, because they have a larger pile. So this one is not one that I bought right away. It was when I needed it for my terry cloth items. And the other one was, let's see, I think we got them all. So these are the 4 though that I usually tell people to buy first, is the tearaway, the light tearaway. If you need the 15-inch, it'd be a medium in the Floriani. A no-show or a fusible no-show, depending on if you're doing garments or quilty stuff. And then the sew and wash, which is your stuff to make for lace, and then a water-soluble topping. Okay, and Kathy says, what would work for Minky? Okay, Minky is stretchy, right? Minky is stretchy, so we need to stabilize it. So I would use probably a no-show, fusible no-show on that. And I might even stabilize it by putting Shape Flex on the back of it, just to make it so that it's not so stretchy when I'm working with it. It depends on what I was using it for, Kathy. I try not to use Minky any more than possible, but it is stretchy. So we know then it needs a cutaway. So I would fuse something to the back of that if I could. Okay. Because, and even though it's like furry, I think if you fuse something on the back, the fusible no-show has a very light fusible, and you don't have to use a very hot iron to fuse it. So that should work okay on the back of your Minky, like as an applique or something. Then it would give it stability, and it would be much easier to trim and so on. And you could use Shape Flex on the back of it. Okay. So that's my little basic set. So I usually tell people when they buy their first stabilizer to buy 4 stabilizers, and it just depends on what they're doing. So, you know, the Tearaway, one of the no-shows, sew and wash, if they're doing lace. Okay. And, oh, just embroidery names on the Minky. So then what I would do with the Minky, yes, I would put something on the back, iron it on, and then you need to have a topper on that. And I probably would tell you to use the heat and gun on it because it's going to stay under there because that is so nappy. It's going to come up through your stitches. The other thing I do with Minky, Kathy, is I use a knockdown stitch in my embroidery pattern so that it actually knocks it down. And then I put water soluble under the knockdown stitches and I sew on top of the knockdown. I don't actually sew right on the Minky other than like a tack down stitch that's like a fill that goes over, a very light fill that goes over the top. But I do stabilize that Minky because it needs to have, so if it's like a blanket or something, I'd tell you fusible no-show because the shape flex is going to be stiffer. So I'd put the fusible no-show on the back where you're stitching it. And then I would do a knockdown stitch with the water soluble underneath that. Okay. So hopefully that helps you. All right. So does everybody know what they need for stabilizer? Does this kind of help you just kind of get an overall view? I didn't want it to be too complicated because there's so many stabilizers. I didn't bring them all back because there's just so many of them. Okay. And it can be so confusing, but if you think in your brain that your fabric stretches, you know you're going to have to use a cutaway. All right. And if your fabric doesn't stretch, you're most likely going to use a tearaway. So that's kind of a general rule, and that's easy to remember. Okay. And then if you're going to make lace, you're going to have a wash away. Okay. And then this is the topper on anything with a nap, unless you're doing something really nappy, and I use heat and gun. Okay. All right. So got a little crazy out there on the sales floor this afternoon. So let me go ahead and switch this back. I don't think Tim's going to be able to come back and say goodbye to everybody because he is out there trying to answer the phone. The second here. Let me switch this back. Give me a second. Okay. So I hope this helped. I just kind of wanted to talk in general about stabilizer. We can get more in depth as we do like some projects, because every time I do a new project, sometimes I have to do a different type of stabilizer than I think because of what it is. So there are obviously exceptions to the rules but I've learned a lot about stabilizers over the years. I'm still learning, and you never are going to stop learning about stabilizer because every time I do something, it's different. So I have used a lot of different stabilizers for different reasons. Some have worked better than others. So it is a total learning curve all the time, and I'm still learning. So I've used a couple of new ones recently, and I'm like, wow, that really works great. So anyway, okay. So next week, the next 2 weeks, we will not have Shields Live because next week, the next 2 weeks, I have to take my father for appointments on Wednesdays. So we will not have Shields Live for 2 weeks. It'll be right at the next week after 4th of July, then we will. Okay. It'll be not the next week is the week before 4th of July. The following week is the week right after, and it'll be the week after that. So it's around the 11th. See, the 4th of July is on Monday. So 4th, 5th, 6th, and then 7th. So it must be the 13th. So I think it'll be the 13th when we have our next Shields Live. I just had a bunch of appointments and everything landed on Wednesday. So I can't do it for a couple of weeks. So if you have any questions, please message us, call us at the store. I have all of these stabilizers on the website, also in the stores. So we have them available. I just ordered a couple of new ones. We're getting a little low on some of them, so I've ordered some. And then I have most of the 15-inch rolls too that Floriani has, except for the mesh. They were back ordered, so I haven't got it in yet. But I do have some 20s. So if you need those bigger ones for those great big hoops. So, okay. So thank you so much for joining us today. I hope I helped you a little bit with stabilizer, and we will see you in a couple of weeks. So bye, everybody.